Okay, let's get into it. We are doing a deep dive into the history of East Coast hip-hop.
A whole story.
The whole story. We're going to trace it from, the very beginning at those block parties in the 70s right up to its place today as this global force.
Right.
And the goal here isn't just to list off a bunch of names and dates. We really want to pull out the key shifts in the sound, the essential records you need to know, and the culture that made it all happen.
And the source material we're working with is actually perfect for that. It's laid out like a historical timeline, and it's really focused on those pivotal moments, the production, the fashion, the big labels.
So what's the core thesis we're starting with?
Simple. East Coast hip-hop was born in the Bronx. The whole sound was built on this foundation of, poetic, socially aware lyrics and this deep, deep love for jazz and soul sampling. That's the DNA right there.
So let's start there. Part one, the genesis. The 1970s and 80s. When we say the birthplace, what did the Bronx actually feel like in the 70s?
It was.
Yeah.
Well, it was a crucible of creativity, really, but one born out of necessity. Okay, you're in the South Bronx. There's a lot of economic hardship, and the Black and Latino communities, they started throwing these block parties to create their own entertainment.
Often using illegally tapped electricity from streetlights, right?
Exactly. But it wasn't just about music. This was the birth of a whole cultural movement.
Right, because that necessity you mentioned, it bred all those integrated elements we talk about.
It really did. That's where you get the four core elements. Rap, which is the storytelling, DJing, the sonic soundation, breakdancing, which is the physical piece, and then graffiti, the visual identity.
They all work together.
They were inseparable. It was a complete culture, not just, a style of music.
And inside that DJ element, you find the three architects, the pioneers who basically taught everyone how to use a record as an instrument.
Yeah, and this is mandatory knowledge. You have DJ Kool Herc, Grandmaster Flash, and Africa Bambaataa.
Okay, break them down for us.
So Herc is the guy credited with inventing the break. He'd use two turntables to extend that instrumental rhythmic part of a song.
The part everyone wanted to dance to.
The part everyone wanted to dance to. Then Flash comes along and refines it. He develops quick mix theory, scratching. He made it more technical. And then Bambaataa, he was the one who codified it all, gave it a name, and helped spread it to the rest of the world.
So you have this incredible underground sound being invented in real time. How did it make the jump to vinyl? How did commercialization start?
It was almost an accident at first. You had these early labels, like Sugar Hill Records, and they saw the potential. That led to the world's first hit hip-hop single, Rapper's Delight, in 1979.
Which was massive, but it's often seen as more of a novelty record.
It is. The real kind of structural commercial push came later in the 80s with Def Jam Records. They gave the art form an authentic platform to really mature.
So if Rapper's Delight was the world's introduction, the late 80s brought the technical revolution. Our sources really zeroed in on Eric B. and Rakim's Paid in Full from '87. How exactly did Rakim change the game?
I mean, he completely changed what it meant to be an MC. Before Rakim, you had simpler rhyme schemes, mostly at the end of the line.
ABAP style.
Right. Rakim introduced this incredible complexity, multisyllabic rhymes, internal rhymes, and his delivery was so smooth, almost jazzy. He made the MC a true poet, a virtuoso.
And that standard is still what people aim for today.
Absolutely. And at the same time, the subject matter was changing too, with groups like Boogie Down Productions.
Criminal Minded, also '87.
A total watershed moment. The sound got harder, more confrontational, and the lyrics moved towards this stark social realism, these street narratives. It was a direct precursor to what we'd later call hardcore or gangsta rap.
And it's wild how quickly the look followed the sound. You know those 80s music videos, a bit low budget, but they established that first uniform?
The Adidas tracksuits.
The Kangol hats, the huge gold chains. It was all about status.
It was the image that got exported to the world. It was bold, aspirational, and instantly recognizable. This was the look of a new cultural power.
Speaking of that power, the 90s took that foundation and just blew it up. The sound got deeper, the canvas got wider. So let's move to part two, the golden age.
The 90s.
Where did things spread to geographically in New York?
The scene just exploded out of the Bronx. I mean, the Bronx was still the foundation, but the creative energy spread out. You had these vital new hubs in Brooklyn, Queens, Harlem.
And the sound of the 90s is so distinct. It's dense, it's rich. What defined the beat production back then?
It became so sophisticated. This was really the golden age of sampling. Producers were digging for these obscure jazz and soul records, the deep cuts, and looping them to create beats that felt, I don't know, both dusty and epic at the same time.
And that complexity in the sound mirrored the complexity in the lyrics.
Perfectly. You had this deep, detailed street realism and social critique happening on the mic.
And you just can't talk about that sound without naming the producers who perfected it. The talent pool was just incredible.
It really was a golden era for producers. You had DJ Premier with his signature scratched hooks and these heavy swung drums. That's the sound of Boom-Bap, hard drums, sharp snare.
The classic sound.
The classic. Then you had Pete Rock, who's much smoother, more jazzy and lush with his samples. Yeah. And then there's RZA.
With the Wu-Tang Clan.
Who brought this whole cinematic, dark, theatrical vibe, mixing martial arts movie aesthetics with gritty street talk. It was like nothing else.
And the labels really solidified the genre's dominance. Def Jam was still a giant, but who else was pushing hip-hop into the global mainstream?
Oh, Bad Boy Records was huge, with a more polished, radio-friendly sound. And then you had Loud Records, which was all about that raw, lyrical street aesthetic. They basically proved hip-hop could dominate both the charts and the underground.
But you can't tell the story of the 90s without talking about the East-West rivalry. It was more than just diss tracks. It got incredibly dark.
Yeah, it was a tragic, defining period. It really showed how much commercial and cultural weight the genre carried at that point.
And it just ended so horribly.
It reached its heartbreaking peak with the murders of Tupac and the Notorious B.I.G. It left a permanent scar, and for many, it really signaled the end of that golden age in this just cloud of sorrow.
So if someone listening wants to really understand the mastery of that era, the absolute high point of lyricism, where do they start?
You have to start at the top. Nas, Illmatic from 1994. It's an undisputed classic. The production is flawless, but it's Nas's storytelling. It's just so vivid, cinematic. He's painting pictures of life in Queensbridge.
It set an impossibly high bar.
It did. And for pure narrative and that uncompromising street reality, you listen to the Notorious B.I.G.'s Ready to Die. Also 94, a masterpiece.
And what about the album that just changed the whole concept of a rap group?
That has to be Wu-Tang Clan's debut, Enter the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers from 93. It was revolutionary. The collective structure, the raw lo-fi sound, and just seamlessly merging martial arts mythology with New York street life.
The aesthetic changed so much, too. We went from the 80s tracksuits to something heavier, more grounded.
Well, completely. It moved to this functional working-class street gear. Timberland boots, Carhartt jackets, baggy jeans. It was a look that felt like it belonged on a New York street corner, whether the video was set in a fancy boutique or a back alley. Utilitarian style as high fashion.
And that toughness really carried right into the 2000s, which our sources defined by this huge duality, right? This massive commercial explosion, but also this parallel intellectual underground movement.
Yeah, the 2000s was a decade of divergence. On one side, you had giants like Jay-Z, DMX, 50 Cent, who were turning hip-hop into this blockbuster corporate enterprise.
Astronomical success.
Truly. But at the same exact time, you had this strong counter-movement, conscious rap, artists who were prioritizing philosophy over chart success.
And the production reflected that commercial boom. The sound got bigger, shinier. Who was crafting that mainstream sound?
Producers like Just Blaze, The Alchemist, Swizz Beatz, they were dominant. They powered labels like Rockefeller and 50 Cent's G-Unit Records. Just Blaze especially was known for these huge, triumphant soul samples that made every track feel like it was made for an arena.
This was also the era of the mixtape, a totally different way of getting music out.
And it was a genuine cultural engine. Mixtapes, usually free, they went from being just promo tools to a way for an artist to build massive street cred without a label.
This was crucial for 50 Cent's rise.
Absolutely critical. His mixtapes created such a huge demand that the mainstream had no choice but to let him in.
So on the other side of that coin, you have the leaders of the conscious movement, Mos Def, Talib Kweli. They were actively rejecting that blockbuster model.
They were. And they often centered around a label called Rawkus Records, which became the hub for this more intellectual, philosophical rap. They valued lyricism, jazz influences, social commentary, and it was a really stark contrast to the era's focus on luxury and excess.
Substance versus spectacle.
Exactly.
Okay, so to capture that whole dynamic, what are the essential albums from the 2000s?
You've got Jay-Z's The Blueprint from 2001.
Yeah.
It's definitive. It really established that high-quality, soulful sampling sound that would dominate for years, thanks in part to producers like a young Kanye West.
And for the street side?
Has to be 50 Cent's Get Rich or Die Tryin' from 2003. That album perfected the link between a hardened street narrative and just massive global commercial success.
And the conscious counterpoint.
I'd point to Mos Def's Black on both sides. It actually came out in '99, but it's the perfect bridge. It's this beautiful fusion of sophisticated jazz and deep conscious political thought.
The fashion was also telling. It shifted from just wearing brands to owning the brands.
That's the 2000s in a nutshell. Success meant ownership. You had these massive high-budget music videos that were basically long commercials for artist-owned lines like Rocawear, Sean John, Echo. Hip-hop wasn't just influencing business, it was business.
Which brings us to today, part 4. Diversification and new classicism, the 2010s to now. The sound is global, but there's also been this move in New York to revive that classic, gritty feel.
Yeah, the landscape is hyper-diverse now. You have artists from all over like Kendrick Lamar who have this huge national influence. But at the same time, you have this really powerful movement in New York to get back to the core textures of the 90s.
It's almost a reaction against the polished sound of the 2000s.
It is. And that revival movement is almost completely defined by one collective.
Griselda Records.
West Side Gun, Conway the Machine, Benny the Butcher.
Those are the guys. They have specifically engineered a return to that raw, lo-fi, intense sound of mid-90s East Coast hip-hop. Their music is all about these obscure, gritty sample loops and intense, complex street lyricism. It's nostalgia made new.
And who's defining production now? It's interesting the sources mention someone like Metro Boomin, who's more Southern, having an impact on New York. And that just speaks to the globalization of the sound. But while producers like him are expanding the palette, you still have New York traditionalists like Hit Boy and Static Selecta who are keeping that classic sample-heavy style alive and moving it forward.
The visuals have changed too.
Definitely. You see the rise of artists who came up purely on the internet and a move towards documentary-style music videos. A little more raw, a little more real.
So what are the recent albums that really capture this new classicism?
West Side Gun's Pray for Paris from 2020 is a perfect example.
Huh.
It's noted for merging this high art, fine art collecting aesthetic with raw rap. And then you have to look at the veterans. Nas's King's Disease, also from 2020, shows the maturity of a legend, proving that the lyrical tradition is still vital.
And the aesthetic now feels like the final stage of that evolution. It's a total fusion.
It really is. The lines are completely blurred. High fashion houses like Balenciaga, Prada, mix right in with streetwear giants like Supreme and Off-White. The underground aesthetic now dictates global luxury trends. It's total cultural dominance.
So, after all that, what does this journey mean? We've gone from the block parties, through the poetic golden age, the commercial and conscious split, and now into this revival of the classic sound.
I think the main takeaway is just the incredible cultural weight of the East Coast tradition. That focus on lyrical complexity, on deep sampling, it established hip-hop as a serious art form. It's why it's studied in universities now. The East Coast wasn't just making music, it was creating a blueprint for a global culture.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener. We've talked through 4 decades of sound, but sometimes seeing it is the best way to understand the evolution.
Exactly. And the source material gives us a cinematic roadmap for this. If you were to put a face to these changes, you can actually watch the chronological arc on film.
Where should someone start?
Start with the 1983 movie Wild Style.
Huh.
It captures the absolute purity of that early Bronx culture.
Yeah.
The breakdancing, the graffiti, the DJing, it's all there, integrated. And then you jump forward 3 decades to the 2014 documentary Nas. Time is Illmatic. It focuses on the creative peak of the golden age, the social context behind that masterpiece.
So one captures the birth, the other captures the maturity.
And if you watch them back to back, you can visually track the incredible evolution of style, of setting, of intensity that we just talked about. It's the best way to see how a neighborhood movement became the defining culture of the planet.